I'm going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful speaker. So I have the pleasure of introducing Louis Griggs, and let me tell you a little bit about him. Louis grew up with all of the trappings of white privilege, but felt called to work and serve in the field of diversity consciousness after having had a near-death experience and coming back to do the work he was meant to do in this lifetime. So instead of rising through the ranks of industry or politics, Louis chose to dedicate his professional life to teaching straight white men like himself who don't get it, how to get it. Louis trains, coaches, and speaks on the subject of diversity and inclusion after spending 37 years in the field and after over 6,000 corporations, academic institutions, and government agencies have utilized his training products and services to bring increased effectiveness to individuals, teams, and organizations as a whole. His most powerful contribution today is working with clients interpersonally and face-to-face in groups or individual settings. Louis in 1982 co-founded Griggs Productions, which resulted in 23 award-winning videos and guides in 4 series. Going International, Valuing Diversity, Valuing Relationship, and Human Energy at Work, an interactive intranet e-learning program, The Potential is Yours, 2 books, Going International and Valuing Diversity, other printed training products and training services, many national and local television and radio appearances, and frequent conferences and speaking engagement. Louis earned both an Amherst BA in political science and a Stanford MBA in entrepreneurial management. Let's give Louis a warm virtual welcome. All right, Louis, you can take it from here.
Great, thanks, Ina and Wendy and SHRM. As I said in the text, I would love it if all of you who are comfortable put your video on so that I can see who I'm sharing our time together with. You know, it's our humanity and our human diversity appears, you know, in the energy and spirit with which we're present. Okay, thank you so much. So a way I want to thank SHRM is, you certainly noticed how much they're doing. Well, I've been a SHRM member since I started in 1982. And one of the most powerful moments with SHRM was after I produced the first Valuing Diversity workshops in the country and the training videos. It took about 4 years after I created the first National Diversity Conference in the country, as strange as that concept was. And I'll never forget the day I compliment SHRM with this, when the president of SHRM called me one day and said, Mr. Griggs, I just want to be ethical and tell you that the success of your National Diversity Conference is reminding us that, yes, we do think diversity should be an HR factor in our consciousness. And we all remember how we're all growing, right? And there was a time, you know, and there's still a time when some people don't get that our diversity is the most important gift we give one another, in addition to our other human resources. So in that same conversation, I said to him, when he said, you know, we're going to compete with you, and I just want to be ethical, that we're going to do that. And in that same conversation, I said, oh no, I have a better idea. Take it over. You know how to run national conferences. And for 3 or 4 years now, it's gone from 50 to 100 to 150 to 250 to 350. And it's taken us all year to do it. Would you please take it over? And they did. So for about 4 or 5 years, they called it the National Diversity Conference, and then they changed it, and they've changed it since then. So anyway, I have huge gratitude to SHRM for opening, as we've all needed to open, to our human diversity is actually not just something to tolerate, but one of the greatest gifts we bring one another, okay? So now a more personal introduction. Thank you for the list of things I've done, but I want this energy in this whole session together to be less about what each of us has done and more about how each of us can be the being rather than the doing of our authentic selves, okay? Because that, as many of us have discovered, is the easiest way to connect with one another at a deeper, more authentic level than just what we're doing, you know? So the way I did get it, as was already said, I'm going to give you two versions, the spiritual one and the non-spiritual one. So for those less comfortable, no judgment, of the spiritual aspect, it can sometimes be too much. Let me just say, we all know we're all humans. And as humans, we know that we all breathe the same air, water, etc., from wherever we come. And we all have virtually similar, if not exactly similar organs, and we live in these human bodies in the same way. And then after that oneness we all share, we are uniquely different. Each of us in the only DNA that has ever existed in the history of life on Earth. We are not exactly like our parents, our siblings, our children, or other people of our race or our gender, our ethnicity, or our age, or our culture, or our language, or all of the other ways in which we differentiate ourselves. So we are simultaneously one and uniquely different. All right, so I didn't say anything spiritual about that, but in a way you can feel at our essential core how true that is, and that both of those are true, our oneness and our uniqueness. Do they cause conflict with one another sometimes? Yes, or at least confusion or bias. That's human. But the spiritual way in which this straight white male was called to get it, since I didn't get it alone through privilege, was that I had a near-death experience about 40 years ago in which I totaled my car and I was called into the light. Some of you have heard about near-death experiences. You've heard these stories before. And for those of you who don't like hearing those or don't believe in them, fine, let it be. I just want to share with you. And in the light, I was involved in a conversation. My soul and spirit had long left the body, and I was told very quickly, Lewis, you are called here to have this conversation and to be sent back because you're not doing your work. So I asked, well, what is my work? Since I'm in the place of truth, I can be told, right? And the answer was, no, Lewis. You need to answer, what is it that keeps you from being, not doing, being all you're capable of being? And all I could do was very deeply search and come up with, well, it must be that I was raised with spiritual parents who said we're all one under God, but here on earth, you've been given all the privilege, so noblesse oblige, you have to give back and you're better than others. Well, just to be raised being told, yes, we're all one under God means I never became a jerk. But to be told I was better than, it got very lonely for me to imagine every time I look in the eyes and soul of another human spirit. In what ways? Yeah, I'm better in privilege, but that's not I'm better. So I discovered in this conversation that my greatest weakness was it being raised in 14 generations of Anglo blood with privilege in this continent. I never needed to learn how to be the one that all the rest of you were doing to bridge the gap between yourself and anybody different than you, including between yourself and any straight white males you happen to know, in your life or with whom you worked. So I discovered that my ethnocentrism was so deep that I couldn't even see out of it. I saw we're all one under God, so I was never a jerk about it, but I didn't know what to do about it because I couldn't do the bridging. You did it all. And when I realized that, I realized what a weakness that was, and that, yes, I had what they call privilege, but you have one of the most important gifts that humans can have, which is to bridge the gap between our differences so that we can connect our oneness. And notice how those go together. You all have become experts at doing that just in your families, not to mention outside of you, whatever your tribe is, to other tribes. And so I became the most lonely and isolated in my own personal life. And then I discovered most of my friends, no judgment, no shame, no blame, also didn't know how to do it if they were straight and white and Anglo. And so all my gifts in all these years have come from the connection with everybody else who's through whom I've learned how to help be part of the bridging that we do together, to hear one another, as we're learning even more in the last 2 weeks how much more we need to hear, and to see one another, and to simultaneously recognize that we are one and uniquely different, and that the differences are not a nuisance, they are a gift to one another. The differences combined with whatever our common goal is in our relationship, from the boardroom to the bedroom, at work, at the grocery store, with friends. Our relationship is dependent upon our simultaneous noticing that we're one and actually value, okay? So that's my real intro to how I do my best to be every day. And then utilize whatever gifts I and each of you have from your education and your life experiences. Those are gifts with which we can all do whatever we're called to do. If we can only keep the balance between being and doing more integrated, and sometimes one's 60 and one's 40, but when it's 90 and 10, it doesn't have the same impact. Okay, that's my introduction. So now what I'm going to do is, so I'll tell you what's happening in the rest of this hour. I'm going to show you just a few slides, and I hate slides. I produced videos and slides and everything, but I hate them because the minute we're on the slide, we're not connecting. So I just have a very few of some of the learnings that I've encountered, in case you can take what you can use and leave the rest. If any of them help you do this work, either in your own relationships at home or in your own workplace, great. Take what you can use and leave the rest, okay? Because not all of it works. So go ahead and raise the slides for me. And I want to start with this amazing quote, okay? I have 3 or 4 amazing quotes from Malcolm X. You can't teach what you don't know. You can't take people where you won't go. So now you can understand why I introduced myself the way I did. This is my work I'm doing endlessly. I don't do any of this work for you or anyone else out of charity or compliance or fairness or equity. We each need to get that it's our own personal work that we need to do to become our whole selves in order to do whatever we're called to do. Okay, it's personal work. And we're going to show in a minute how there hasn't been enough of that. That's what we're here to do, is the personal aspect. Okay, and so the next slide is just one of the 3 graphic ones that I use in the workplace, but it's just as true in our personal lives. Every one of us knows what it feels like to have a new idea different than the old one of our parent, our partner, our boss, our associate, our lover, a different culture, a different gender, a different orientation, okay? A different class, a different ethnicity. We all know what it feels like to stand. Put yourself, I wish I had so I could zoom in and just point a dot on the old there. Put yourself on the old. Can I do that with my cut? No, you do it. So put yourself somewhere on that old line and know we all know what it feels like to stand there and actually be better, have our idea be better understood and more effective, measurably provable than your new idea. Okay? And we all know what it feels like to stand on the new line or the different line and have this idea that we're not feeling heard about. Okay? And the righteousness of those hanging onto the old one use the evidence that there still seems to work better. We all have stood in both places. And in every relationship we're in, we know what it feels like to have moments of being in both places. And if we can just own that we each know both, then we can be more empathetic and interactive with the one who stands in the other at that moment, okay? And then the turning point, for which this graph was called on the cover of a book called The Turning Point by Fridtjof Capra back in the 80s, and he still lives here in Berkeley. Okay, but I love this graph and have used it in all these 40 years. The turning point is the point at which that newer idea actually has provable, measurable ways to be better than the old way. The old way worked then, it doesn't work as well now. So we all know what it feels like to be in that new place where it is finally being heard and is proven to be successful. And we all know what it feels like to still be hanging on to the older way that isn't working as well. Okay? So again, when we all get that we know what it feels like to stand in all four of those places before and after our turning point, that's consciousness and empathy we need to have with ourselves, no shame, and with others, no blame. Okay, next slide. Another learning I had, which is very simplistic, is that in the organization, in any organization, but think about it in our culture too, now that we're all being so national and cultural about how can we improve, it's just as true that under a normal shaped curve, most of the change that takes place, understandably, is under the policies and practices of this organization or of this town or of this culture or of this government. That's appropriate. And most of the interpersonal change that takes place is understandably to the left of that in what I call behavioral compliance. So I came up with those words. It's not just legal compliance. We all know what it feels like when we change how we treat somebody because of our assumption that that's the way you need to be treated because you're one of those. Okay? And it even reminds me, almost, since I grew up in Minneapolis, which means I'm feeling even more closely now to this crisis than the other ones, even though they all match. And that is, there's a thing called Midwestern nice or Minnesota nice, which is raised all over the Midwest, and in parts of it's all over this entire culture, which is, even though the original words of our Constitution, we the people, probably had an original draft that was we the straight white male landowners, not our wives, not our slaves, not our immigrants from some place as far away as Italy. So we had to change it to we the people. But the words are still appropriate if only we could apply them to everybody, right? But behavioral compliance, those words remind me of how it feels when each of us is just behaviorally changing how we treat one another, but we still aren't connected at a deeper emotional, spiritual, soul level at all. We aren't feeling the human energy, whether we're enhancing or depleting it, okay? We only notice when someone else is. So the work I'm wanting to do and I'm doing with us today is more of the two extremes. On the far right, the systemic version of dealing with it, which needs to be better done by every organization and now by our entire government and countries, federal, state, and local, we need to recognize what engineers recognize. This is the sentence I have to use for them to understand the work we're trying to do, and that is because they don't want to deal with the touchy-feely portion of it. And listen to this sentence. Every single system, whether you think now of the human body, a lake, the cosmos, a computer, the chair you're sitting in, pick one. It doesn't matter. Every single one you picked is a system that only works precisely because its parts are different. And those different parts relate to each other functionally. And that functional difference in the way they relate enhances the strength of that system. And that system gets broken down whenever a piece of it is broken. So if we can just think that our human interactions in our one-on-one relationships and in our team relationships inside the organization or out are systems also that need the differences we bring to be enhancing gifts to one another and to whatever our common goal is in this team at this moment, which changes, okay? So to do that better, even though all four of these need to be done in a more balanced way, I focus on the personal on the far left, the deeply personal, even before the interpersonal, and that is what's my 100%. And I literally mean that if any of us can just please, with no shame, stand in the place where we experience our own righteousness or our own bias, own it with no shame, recognize it. In fact, notice our natural defense and survival skill that, this part of me is fine. In fact, I'm 90% fine. But if each of us can just notice the 1%, the 5%, the 10%, that is our own personal work we have the opportunity to do to become our fullest authentic selves, so that we can benefit from one another's authenticity and fullness. We need to own 100% responsibility, no shame, for our opportunity to work on our 1%, our 5%, our 10%. And once we get used to that, we get so relaxed about it that once we realize we're safe to do it with one another, wow, what just happened between you and me? I'm willing to own 100% of the piece that didn't work. And that enables you to go, instead of, well, thank you, I'm glad you got it, you're better able to go, wow, I think I even contributed in this way. And the minute we can do that with one another, we're safe. Okay? Next slide. This is only the third slide I'm going to do of all this graphics that say it all. This one is almost more important to me than any, and this was more recent. I didn't use this one for 40 years. I've used it for 10 years since I got out of a leadership training program. So I want us to picture that all of us, all 54 of us at this moment, are starting now to spend 1 week together in a leadership training, 24/7 together, so as to discover our fullest selves with one another and to help one another discover the fullest self of the other. And in order to do that, we need you to recognize that in order to maximize the intimacy of our relationships during this week together, 24/7, we need to notice that the word intimacy freaks some of us out. So fine, let's use the word trust or collaboration or connection. But in order to have 100% trust, we need to do two things. We need to notice, sorry, my voice. We need to notice that only if we can have 0% power over or under one another. In this group together, we are equal. We have different jobs, different life experiences, different age, different learnings, different crises to share with one another that are gifts to one another. But we have no power over, nor do we enable and tolerate any power under one another. Zero. Now we're safer. And the other one we have to have is zero sexualized energy. Zero. I don't mean just behavior, I mean energy. Yes, our human sexuality is one of our wonderful gifts. We share in whatever ways is our natural way with whatever is the appropriate person to share the same in the same way. That's not what we're here for. So together now, all 54 of us are going to have no power over or under one another and no sexualized energy of any kind. Wow, are we ready to get to know each other more intimately? How about with more trust, collaboration? Let's go. Okay? All right. Any question about these 3 slides before we go on? I don't want to take 10 questions, but if there's 1 or 2 that needs clarification or I said something that triggered somebody, speak out. You don't even have to raise your hand. Just be the first one to say, I have a question about one of them. And if you don't, we'll go on. But if you do, I'm here. And you would have to mute yourself in order to ask your question. Anybody? No? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we'll have more time later. Next slide. This one isn't one I created. You've all seen it. And yes, I see the imperfect parts of it, that these are just Black humans, and they're in the back in the bleachers or even outside the bleachers, that brings up all kinds of issues about what real equity is, okay? So we get that. It's imperfect. But look at the part of it that is perfect. Look at the equality of those three boxes that we, with all of our charity, gave these three so that we were being equal. And notice the difference in what true equity means. And I'll never forget, literally like 38 years ago, after I had just begun doing this work, talking about valuing our diversity, a lawyer who worked in the AAEEO department, whatever you call it, in DC, said to me, Louis, are you actually asking that we treat people differently instead of the same? And I had to go, absolutely, that's exactly what I'm asking. Is that each of us can be treated similarly when that's what's appropriate in our team, but when any of us has a difference that benefits from different treatment that enables you to be your fullest self differently than I need to be treated to be my fullest self, we're getting closer to equity and collaboration. That's why I love this one. Okay, next slide. And we're going to get done with these as quickly as possible so that we can do what I want to do, which is some little breakout sessions with each of you to share some personal learnings, okay? But before I tell you about one of my favorite exercises, I want you to really feel the depth of this quote from James Baldwin. And that is that not everything that is faced can be changed. But nothing can be changed until it's faced. Whew. So I already said personally, when we each own our own piece and are comfortable to look at it as an opportunity to grow, not as a shameful factor, then we're growing. And as this nation, look at what we now finally, from a very clear video that allows no denial, look at what we're all feeling and experiencing. And finally able, let's hope, to change what we are now better able to face than we ever have faced in our 400 plus years. With all the progress we've made, without measuring it as 10, 50, or 90, is it enough? No. And that reminds me of another quote I didn't put up here, but I think it was also Malcolm X who said, when somebody said, yeah, there's been a lot of progress now. Remember in the 60s, of which I was a part, there was this, and there was this, and there was this. And the answer was, yeah, the knife used to be 9 inches deep, and now it's only 6 inches deep. Thank you. Really? Can you feel the depth of that experience if that's your experience? Okay. And I even heard him say afterwards in a recent video, and if it's removed, the wound is still there. Whew. So we all have wounds from crises and experiences and betrayals and traumas in our life from which we've had great learnings, and we're going to share some of that soon. But let's at least acknowledge, really hear and empathize and acknowledge with what the wound of each other is, whatever it is, whether we think we caused it personally in the last 5 minutes, or whether we are all part of an entire culture worldwide, not just in this nation, that has men dominating women and tribes killing tribes, black tribes killing black tribes, Asian tribes killing Asian tribes, Caucasian tribes killing Caucasian tribes. And I don't even like using those 3 labels because that's racist. I don't believe in the word race because we're all mixed. If we really came out of Africa and traveled north and lost melanin and traveled east and changed that way, we all are inbred and mixed. And whites in Italy aren't the same as whites in Norway, and blacks in Kenya aren't the same as blacks in South Africa, or Morocco, and Asians in China and Japan aren't the same as Vietnam. So we need to get that even race isn't the right word, at least how we think we define it. Okay, let's go to the next exercise. Next slide. This is a labeling exercise I've done every training for the last 38 years, and we wanted to try to do today, and we're not going to because it needs us to be in the same room. It's too difficult but I want you to see it. I want to tell it to you so that you can take it and use it on your own organization or bring me in to do this work with you. And with, by the way, is better than you doing it alone or me doing it alone or any two of us doing it together. Maximizes the modeling of our diversity and the way we facilitate. So please use each other and bring me. Let's do this together. But here's how this one works. I was going to ask 4 of you to choose to be a volunteer, which would have required 4 of your videos to be the 4 right next to each other so we can all watch. You 4, and you would each have a label that you can't see being put on your shoulder. Well, we couldn't figure out how to do that here. Okay, and one of your labels says, I'm the expert, and one says, I'm the leader, and one says, ignore me, and one says, laugh at me. And different trainers use others, you can make them up. I'm angry, ridicule me, whatever, okay? But with these 4 labels, and you don't know what yours is, we then start a conversation about any topic because we don't care about the content now. We're gonna feel the energy, the interpersonal energy that we enhance or deplete in one another in this exercise. In 10 minutes, it'll blow your mind. It takes no more than 10 or 15 minutes, okay, to feel it. And that is to have this discussion, treat each other that way. And the fastest way is to not be embarrassed about it. Know it's a game and we don't care about the content. We want you to exaggerate how you treat that person as the expert or the leader, or you ignore them, or you laugh at them and go, Louis, that's ridiculous. You know, whatever it takes. And I'm telling you, in 5 or 10 minutes, you each will totally change how you feel if you're wearing one of those labels. And guess what? Our presumptions are even wrong about how the other person might respond. To be treated as the expert, you might go, wow, I really like being the expert. Thank you. Ask me more, and here's my answer. Or you might feel like it's too much. I'm not an expert. You're putting too much pressure on me. And the same with leader. I love being the leader. I take over. Or it's too embarrassing. I'd like more interactivity. Doesn't matter which label goes on which person, no matter what you look like, it never fails to work for all of us. And the one where you're totally ignored, you have to really play the game. The minute I speak, you have to just turn your head and talk to the other one, talk to the leader or the expert, right? Or if I'm laughed at, immediately, if you can imagine wearing those labels, you start to feel, oh, what's my survival skill? Well, guess what the best part of the whole exercise is? These 3 questions. Each of you then, without looking at your label, answers, how were you treated? Well, they treated me this way, or they ignored me, or I felt, okay? How did you feel when you're treated that way? I felt really great. I felt really terrible. I felt insulted. I felt confused. And then how did you respond or react when you were treated that way? This is key. Because as I said before, in addition to the inappropriate behavior that is sent our way, in addition to that seeming like it's the biggest problem and the biggest opportunity to just change it and end it and have them fix themselves, it's key to be able to notice that our response, our reaction, isn't the same as everyone else's. If I'm ignored, I might choose humor or some other way to try to get involved so that you stop ignoring me. Someone else might shut down. Someone else might get angry. Someone else might leave. It's very important learning to notice with no shame. Wow, the way I feel and then the way I respond is my survival skill. Is this. Is that working? Okay, this is a really powerful exercise. Okay, we're not doing it today, but you can do it anytime you want. It never fails. All right, next slide. And then we're going to be done and do what I want to do. Okay, the thing I love about Zoom is that here we are meeting all over the country. And when we can do breakout rooms and just share with one another something, most of us love it. So we're going to have breakout room now, the total now of 54 of us. It's not 80. So how many breakout rooms do we need to be 3 or 4 in each room? What's the math? 4, 1, 2, 12 breakout rooms, or 13, or 15, something like that, okay? So either Wendy or Gina are now going to automatically, arbitrarily have the computer throw us into those 12 or 13 or 15 breakout rooms, and you're going to have 3 or 4 people. And what I want you to do now, since we have another half hour now to do these and to have Q&A with all of you and more interactivity, we're done with everything I had to share. We're in this together now. The question, go to breakout room number 1. Go to the slide before this one. Okay. Just like I told you in the white light, I was asked, what is it that keeps you from being all you're capable of being? In your breakout room, I want each of you to share with one another that as authentically as you can, what in your own growth process still either has been or still is perhaps something that keeps you from being all you're capable of being, which is a loss to all of us, okay? So this one isn't about what you're doing wrong to other people. This is your own interpersonal work. It's also not what keeps you from doing. It would be totally authentic to say, I can't do it because I'm being discriminated against. I can't do it because of this disability, it just happened, or this accident, or that. Those are all legitimate.